So, as you may have heard, the creative team chief, Mr. Sasaki, resigned after suggesting that a female comedian should play the role of an Olympig. It's a pun on Olympics and pig, and the female comedian is actually known for her chubby charms, and which she's very proud of. Naomi Watanabe is a really wonderful entertainer, and she's not shy of, asserting her unique personality, and that includes the chubbiness of her body, which is really great. As long as you are healthy, you can be, you know, chubby if you want, and that is your personality. So there's nothing to make fun of about Miss Naomi Watanabe, but the creative team chief, Mr. Sasaki, suggested within the group that maybe they should make a character of Olympig and cast Miss Watanabe in that role, and which was is of course ridiculous, and it's body fascism, and it's making fun of a person's unique character, which is not acceptable, of course, and not only in the Olympics but in the modern world. Now, so it is inevitable that Mr. Sasaki resigned, but let me say something about the you know atmosphere in which this kind of scandalous behavior was created. Mr. Sasaki is actually very well known in the world of commercial films in Japan, and as you know, commercial films are broadcast among the TV programs on terrestrial TV. And I should say that I have been a vocal critic of this. The Japanese TV industry is not really doesn't have a good track record in terms of respecting human rights and considering gender equality and so on. I'm really, really very critical of Japanese terrestrial TV. It's so backward, and it doesn't really belong to the 21st century. And I have been a vocal critic, for example, of the lack of socially aware comedy on Japanese TV. I mean, there are some comedians, most notably Daisuke Muramoto of Yoshimoto Corporation, who has been engaged in political satire involving criticism of U.S. bases in Okinawa and so on. But the mainstream comedians, they make laughter out of really, really, mundane things in your daily life, which is good in themselves as a genre. But if that is the only genre broadcast on terrestrial TV, that comes as a serious problem. And NHK, Japan's national broadcaster, is no rival to BBC on this, because the BBC has a long history of really excellent satire, commenting on the prejudices and inequalities in society. But NHK doesn't have that. I mean, the laughter provided by NHK, it's so, for the lack of better words, kindergarten level. I mean, the assumptions are so naive, and they are behaving, the NHK commissioning editors are behaving as if they are school children, as if they don't know anything about political scandals and problems, social problems in Japan. So there's this atmosphere of pretending to be a naive child on Japanese TV. And in that atmosphere, um, you know, forms of expression which are not really acceptable in the 21st century has survived and is thriving. And I don't watch Japanese TV, terrestrial TV, because they are so ridiculous. But I only watch Netflix and Amazon Prime and the usual suspects. But I don't watch Japanese TV because they are so ridiculous, low quality. And and Mr. Sasaki actually has been a star in that climate, and that explains why and how he came to this really ridiculous idea of an Olympic. This surprisingly, is something that you'd expect in the atmosphere of Japanese terrestrial TV and its closely related commercial films. So it's really sad because Naomi Watanabe, this female comedian, a wonderful female comedian, she's planning to move to New York from April. So she has been doing creative works on global scale. I mean, she is vetted by the values of the 21st century. But Mr. Sasaki is not. And the fact that a person like Mr. Sasaki, who actually doesn't have a feel for what is required of the creative works in this century and on the international platform like the Olympics, is the chief of creative director. This is a really shameful situation. But I think in a way this is great because the really bad sheet, so to speak, within the creative team has been identified and is now removed. So maybe it's good for the Tokyo Olympics. And another interesting thing is that this scandal was reported by Shukan Bunshun, which is a prestigious Japanese weekly. And Bunshun is published by Bunge Shunju, which is the company which hosts the most prestigious literary awards in Japan, the Akutagawa Prize and Naoki Prize. And so, Shukan Bunshun, the Bunshun Weekly, has been doing this kind of really great journalism in the last few years. But having said that, the Japanese newspapers and Japanese TV, including the NHK, have not contributed to this good journalism, which is really a shame. I mean, everything is rigged in Japan. The newspapers and TV, they just look up to the cabinet office, I mean, headed by Mr. Suga for the moment. And they don't really publish something that would criticize the powers that be in Japanese society. So if it was not for, it were not for Bunshun Weekly article, Mr. Sasaki might have been at the helm of the creative team even today. So this scandal actually exposes a lot of serious defects in Japanese media and Japanese creative industry. And after this, I do hope that they would be able to come up with something really, really wonderful. Actually, the article, Bunshun Weekly article, reported something really important, which is that a choreographer called Mikiko, Mikiko actually have already came up with a really wonderful plan for the opening ceremony. Mikiko is internationally known for choreographing such wonderful groups like Perfume, Baby Metal, and so on. So she should be the one who is leading the creative team. And Mikiko's work is already known because she choreographed the wonderfully accepted closing ceremony presentation of Japan at the Rio Olympics. So she has been tested already, and she had a really wonderful plan for the opening ceremony of Tokyo Olympics. But then Mr. Sasaki came, and she kind of put everything upside down. And suggested this Olympic thing, which is really ridiculous, as you agree. So maybe it's a time for change for Japanese, show business and entertainment industry. For too long, Japan has been in, posture mode. I mean, as I said, the lack of socially aware comedy on Japanese TV is a scandal. I have been a really vocal critic of that. Just ask any Japanese about my criticism of the Yoshimoto company, their outdated approach to comedy. And the Yoshimoto company actually is very closely related, tied to the government. I mean, Yoshimoto has received a lot of commissions from the government to do some business. As I said, Mr. Muramoto, who is doing socially aware comedy, is also from the company Yoshimoto. So I'm not saying that every comedian coming from Yoshimoto are garbage. I'm not saying that. But the majority of comedy coming from Yoshimoto is all outdated and old-fashioned. So it's time for change. So it's good that Mr. Sasaki resigned, although he has done a lot of wonderful work. He was not fit to lead the creative team for this particular occasion, the opening ceremony of Tokyo Olympics. And I do hope somebody like Mikiko would be given a fair chance to do what is proper and truly entertaining on a global platform like the opening ceremony of the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics. That is my opinion.